Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Men and Sex. I'm your host, Mr. Wood. This podcast is all about normalizing some of the most taboo conversations. Here we talk about sex, we talk about masturbation, we talk about intimacy. And when we normalize these conversations, it gives us the freedom to tell our own story and not carry that weight alone anymore. Today, I have a very special guest, a teacher, a dear friend of mine, my neighbor in the community. His name is Adam Bear, and he is a movement specialist, somatic educator, father of two girls, husband, and Jedi in training. And I can support that last statement for sure. Adam, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So Adam is currently teaching me Qigong, and we meet on a weekly basis. I meet him online, I meet in person, and we are constantly getting attuned to the subtleties in our bodies, alignment, energies, noticing the subtle shifts and how that changes energy flow and all of this. And I wanted to get Adam on here today to dive into this world of inner attunement and how these subtle shifts can affect energy, mindset, clarity, and how that all relates to what's going on in the world in relationship to sexuality. Um, just want to open it up to you before we dive in, Adam, about what got you so passionate about martial arts and these subtle attunements inside of yourself.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. Um, well, from an early age, I was really into the Ninja Turtles. Some people already
Yes.
know this about me. Um, so the Kung Fu dream, martial arts dream was something that came really early on, and then I didn't have access to for um, almost like 2 decades. And then as I was coming into my adulthood, um, I sort of found me again. It came back and found me, and the Chinese martial arts have been part of my life for the past 2 decades. So I think the expression of power is probably the biggest drive for me. The slow movements of Tai Chi have always been very attractive to me. The smoothness, the fluidity, whether that's in like um, seeing it in sort of live action or even animation. I think about Master Oogway from Kung Fu Panda, and when he's
Mhm.
doing Tai Chi up on the hillside underneath the plum blossoms. Um, and also the raw physical power of like more Shaolin style kung fu, and the intensity and the discipline are all factors that have attracted me to martial arts and the deeper practices.
Mm. And I also want to tell the listeners that Adam has also been involved for years in men's personal development, whether we look at men's events, he holds his own events with men. He is a leader within the local community where I live in the men's group that gathers there. So what have you seen has also been potent in the bridge of body and mind when it comes to men connecting and having a language to grow together?
Mm. Yeah. So I think it would be it's hard for me to separate men's work and the larger cultural context that we're in. And one of the things that has always been present for me is around um, the drive and this feeling of um, input or effort into the body. And classically at this point we could label like biohacking or certain aspects of biohacking, and how that has evolved in this realm of men and becoming more disciplined and maybe like working out, and like just there's a lot of yang. We would say that this is a lot of yang energy, which is, for in a simple way to put it, it's the doing, it's the
Mm,
like
mm,
fire and intensity and the creating these conditions, um with the, I guess, the hope that we would change, that we would become more confident or more um productive or more successful. And there's these ways in which I know men, and the men myself included, and a lot of the men that I've known have sort of come into this like awakening, if you will, um, and really pushing, And for me, what I found interesting in working with men and alongside men in men's work in men's spaces is that the 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 challenge, the curiosity, the I don't know what else to call it, around learning how to balance that intensity with the softness. And I think right now we see it expressed oftentimes in polarities. So we either
Mhm.
get like one side of it with the really intense, aggressive nature dominating the body in order to create conditions for, again, success, or too soft and there's not enough physicality in a man's life, and it's the emotional flowing and long extended check-ins with self, and like I'm really not sure, this sort of like, so again, not judging, just saying
Yeah.
that these expressions in polarity I've seen a lot of, and I'm interested in like, where's the balance, where do we balance these things out in ourselves.
You know, I don't say this outright a lot, but it's one of the reasons why I think talking to men and looking at their relationship to sexuality is such a potent tool because it is a tool that can call a man into his body instead of his mind. And if we look at yoga, if we look at Tai Chi, if we look in a lot of ways for thousands of years, these tools have been utilized to bring the attention out of a hyper thinking mind into the present moment by observing sensations. And I would love to just like weave that throughout this episode in your own discoveries and my experience working with you of what we're doing in these subtle positions of how those interplay, of
Mm,
how a man can be utilizing the gym or his kung fu or his pleasure in a way to help him to become more present and see what happens from there
mm, yeah.
by not being super heady. I would love to just pass it over to you and talk about what has you so fascinated with the subtleties. I know you talk about this a lot in your own practice, whether it's a standing practice, whether it's cloud hands or something. We're doing these very simple things, just standing there with hands in a certain way, constantly like feeling and doing things with our fingers and, the chin and all this. Like, how is paying attention to the subtleties, the mastery?
Okay, so you know, there's a basic premise, I guess we could say. And again, this is not me. This I didn't come up with this, but Taoism really looks at um this idea of nature and a natural way. And um within this premise, there's a an exploratory process of what is it like um to surrender to the intelligence of the physical body.
Mm,
And um, that in and of itself is a process of softening and
mm,
sometimes I'd say like thawing.
mm,
Um, and then the challenge, I think, again, if we just like go back to sort of, looking at men and the challenge that we're faced with, is what does it take to thaw the emotional body, so that we can feel more deeply? And these pathways to the emotional body are really in the physical body. And um, some of the practices are really challenging, as we both know, because it is oftentimes easier for us to do something, to again insert or assert some kind of effort, because it placates our, again, I'm speaking in generalities here, but as men, our need to know, or our need to know that something is working or something is
mm,
progressing, that we are actively engaged in something and we're moving it forward. This sort of excessive amount of needing to be productive, needing to be successful, needing to be motivated and driven and disciplined. Well, when we meet the body in some of these more esoteric, let's just say, um, doorways, and we are asked to stand still and to connect with our breath, the first thing that happens for everyone is we are confronted with an incredible amount of discomfort and an overwhelming amount of, in I would say, imbalance in the way that the sensations in the physical body are presenting themselves to us, and it can be very confronting. It can be alarming even to have such a spotlight, if you will, on different areas of the body to see the shape that we actually take in space. And the challenge is both a physical one, and the challenge is also an emotional, mental, psychological challenge as well, because who we believe we are and who we identify with and what the shape of our body
Mm,
structurally and our breath, the shape our breath is taking, the qualities of our breath are taking, are in some many cases diametrically opposed to each other. Like what we're seeing and feeling in real time does not actually match up with the ideas and identities that we might be holding about ourselves. And so this process of unification begins in that space. Like,
mm,
oh, how much effort am I putting into um, selling myself on an idea through my activities in life?
mm.
And, you know, there are extreme examples of this, right? Sometimes in my life, I wanted to go to the gym. I just want to go to the gym because, like, if I get my muscles, when I look in the mirror and I got my six pack or whatever, right? Like, that makes me feel good. And it's not that that isn't a good thing to be
Yeah,
strong, to be physically well put together.
yeah.
But when I go internal, we could talk a little bit about what that means. When I go inside my body and I connect with my breath, what is the information that I'm getting back about what's really going on? Am I going to the gym? Am I doing whatever it is? If I'm, am I working 60 hours a week, or if am I giving all of my life force to my family? Even maybe there's all kinds of different ways that this excess can show up from us actually having to show up and be with the realness of our psycho emotional physiologic situation.
It's like the class, I'm for some reason coming to mind is like that saying of everywhere I go, there I am. But it's this constant, if I stop for a moment, then I'll be there. So it's like the mind always in the future, the mind always in action, the mind always 10 steps ahead because if I actually stop and be here, then I'll have to confront myself. Whether
Yeah.
that's physically, emotionally, mentally, there's some part of me that will have to meet me. And once again, I think this is such a potent bridge to sexuality because I think this is one of those things in a world of constant doing, in the same way, pleasure has become this action that's like,
Mm,
it's almost like a soothing action. It's like a soothing action to pause me from action. It's like I'm doing
mm,
so much action. I'm going to do this action that will turn me off for a second and my brain will shut off for a quick
ah,
moment. I'll disconnect from a quick moment. I'll, watch like so many men watch a video and be distracted from seeing myself or the world that I'm living in. And I love that you brought in the discomfort of slow and silent
mm,
that this really is what I feel in whatever way that I can that I want to call a man towards, even myself, is how can I be more slow? How can I be more in the quiet so that I can discover things there? But that's the courage that I think being in community of men has it helps often a lot is like to have that courage to say
mm.
to keep going a step forward, to look and say there's something positive to be found there in the slowing down and in the silence.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. It make what you're saying also like makes me kind of think of this interesting exploration of for our, you know, just my own interesting exploration of like, how do we know what it is that we want? Like, how do we know where we're going? How do we know what we're supposed to be doing? Or I mean, feeling, we could say feeling, but even if it's this doing thing, how do we know what we're supposed to be doing? Is it based upon our ability to accumulate resources? Is it based on our ability to consolidate or accumulate power and influence? Is it our ability to be seen a certain way? Like, how do we really know what we're supposed to be doing? And for me, that space that you're talking about slowing down, feeling, and exploration is scary also because it exposes what maybe the Tibetan Buddhists would say, like, is this baseline of confusion
Mm,
that we have, that we cannot escape,
mm,
that ultimately as human beings we are totally and utterly confused,
yeah,
totally and utterly confused. And when we
yeah.
feel like we are not confused, we have completely gone insane. We've lost our connection with the reality of the situation, which is total and utter confusion.
Mm,
So that's like a baseline. It's like, okay, here we are, we're confused. So what do we do now? And every time we start to try to grab on to, and this comes back to sensation, right? Every time we try to grab on to a good feeling and we try to hold
mm,
on to that good feeling,
mm,
what have we done? We have calcified something that is intrinsically uncalcifiable, right? Mother Nature, we could say, are the yin, the flowing waters of life, the cosmic intelligence. These are concepts that in real time have they don't stop.
mm,
There's not a stop. It might be a pause, like you said, right at the very tip of an ellipse, as the Earth cycles around the sun, or as we enter into a cyclical change, right? The time between winter and spring, and
right.
there's this feeling of like, whoa, there's a pause if we allow ourselves to feel the pause, but it isn't a stop, and it isn't a I'm going to hold on to this thing, and this is the answer.
Mm,
Um, so I don't know if I'm going too far off the path there, but again, as men, these are questions that I feel like are really important, which is like, how do we know that that's what it's supposed to look like? How do
mm,
we know that that's what pleasure is? How do we know that this is the direction we should be going? How do we know these things?
mm. I think that weaves in perfectly to why I even do this podcast and talk about this particular subject is because I think that it's one of those things that these are the conversations that a lot of men aren't getting to be a part of because they're not in spaces where we just ask questions. And I think that's one of your greatest skills. And I know that you have great mentors in that way. It's just like, what are the questions to be asking? And particularly when it comes to this subject, sexuality, it's most don't have space to ask any questions about
Mm,
anything. And they're just carrying habits, belief systems that from, 12, 13, 14 years old. And,
yeah.
I love that you brought in the confusion aspect that there's a freedom in feeling this is confusing. Like, okay, now what? Instead of this pretending that we know everything that's going on. Mm,
But yeah, and like and if we imagine it as a sensation, right? This like the confusion for me right now in this moment feels like a space that opens up, and it can be empty, relative to the feeling of, again, identifying something and saying this is what it is, and then that space is filled. And um, when we're in dialogue with, I'll just cut to my own experience, and we can, go move to more towards this sex and sexuality, sexual expression. It's like I notice for myself that's still one of the most challenging things in my own expression of sexuality and intimacy, is that sometimes I have a hard time simply receiving.
mm,
And what's interesting is that that's what oftentimes what I really want, right? Is I want to
mm,
be able to just like
mm,
just let go, soften, and be like
mm,
totally soft. And that's also really hard. And
mm.
no pun intended. But what's interesting about that, knowing that about myself, that has come not as a direct reflection of sex in my life, intimacy in my life, but actually through these very clear, defined practices of standing, of breathing, of going internal, and
Mm,
starting to create new space in my body, inside of the experience of body,
mm,
that are allowing me then to be more reflective, more open to feedback when I'm in relationship to, whether it's my wife intimately, or it's my family, or it's working relationships. The patterns of, we could call them, we'll call it arousal, and arousal isn't necessarily just sexual arousal.
right.
Arousal is activation of any kind,
Mm-hmm.
right? Maybe I'm really stressed out, or maybe something didn't go right on a job site, and now all of a sudden I've got to figure out a solution. My arousal state is the same in all those different places. at a
Hmm.
base fundamental level. It's like
Right.
arousal here in a professional situation, activation is the same as over here. How I'm responding to it could be looked at as the same exact pattern. It's just in a different environment.
Hmm.
So rather than trying to like effort the change, what would it be like if we moved towards surrender? Sure, letting go. And these things are nuanced because it isn't just the complete abandonment of structure. And that's something that maybe we can explore a little bit. But we have to be willing to invest in loss. We have to be willing to lose our footing and our gripping with our uh, ideas of what it is in order to find out what it actually is or what it could be, or
Hmm.
where there's potential for it to simply just be an unnameable experience. And then we're alive and it doesn't really matter what it is. Like people want to call it this, you want to call it that. It's like, okay, cool. That's cool. And it probably is more than just that name that we gave it.
Hmm.
Again, too heady, too abstract. Just let me know.
No, no. What's bringing to mind for me is that I really, my passion and my experience thus far is I care about being a bridge for people that are earlier on the path. And that's just where I've been most passionate, is to be the bridge of someone earlier on the journey. I believe that there's a story I tell that the majority of men are very early in the path when it comes to the ability to just sit and be with themselves and observe their thoughts in any way and not be taken away by them. To even
Mm,
understand what that means when I say it in that way. And, some of these things that we're doing in the classes together that you're leading is in its own way a mastery of just being able to be present in the body, to hold my hands like in this way, to, be feeling my elbows at this distance, to be noticing my breath and stand there for 10 minutes. Like to some, that would be unheard of. They've
yeah.
never stood in one spot for 10 minutes and just observed themselves. And I think that the importance of a lot of these conversations, sexuality, kung fu, gym, whatever it is almost putting these carrots in front of men's noses to say there's an importance to you slowing down and doing something other than running all the time.
Yeah.
And that's just coming to mind for me in this conversation is like some of the things even that I'm doing with you has required my own mastery just to not have a super overthinking mind to even be able to do that at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, oh man. Whew. It's like there's I appreciate you bringing us back to sort of the beginner, right? The beginner's mindset, the beginner in this particular kind of work. And again, waking up, um, the 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 first thing is like I wish that somebody had told me, and it's funny because I think about like there are probably people that if they heard this right now, be like, I told you, but I don't remember being told. I might not have been listening, but I don't
Yeah,
remember being
yeah.
told. And I wish that I had heard more often from, again, embodied elders, maybe, or men who are further along on the path, that this is a long term process. This is long range application, direct interaction, direct experience, exploration. It's not going to happen quickly. And that in and of itself can be extremely alarming given the current cultural conditions that we find ourselves in, where if we have social media on our phone, we are already swimming inside of a projection field that's creating psychological emotional patterns and belief structures that are saying that everything should be happening quickly. If it doesn't happen quickly, it doesn't have value. What's so wild to me is like that is the exact opposite of the reality that I have personally experienced.
Mm,
Every single thing that I have found to be holding true in my life and staying that has staying power
mm,
is oriented to longer term development, longer term relationships with practice. So let's just give it a real example for our men out there who are like, dude, what the F are these guys even talking about? Let's just talk about breath. Okay. We've all probably been in some setting at some point, even if you're, a man who's living in the quote mainstream, you've probably been in an environment where somebody said, okay, let's all take a breath together. All right. Breathing is not a simple process. It's not. And the fact that we breathe without trying to control the breath is in and of itself, that's the obviousness of how complicated this thing is. And
Hmm.
we look at breath and we go, oh, well, it's breathing. It's not a big deal. But we will spend years developing our breath if we put attention to it. There's so much information, so much space, so much of our reality is a product of how we breathe
Hmm.
that to not give the breath its due attention for its importance in our life, to not spend that much time giving back to what gives us life is to me is insane. It's like
Hmm.
we're going to spend all our time developing this thing, developing this thing, building that thing, going over here, all this stuff, but we won't even sit still with our breath for 5 to 10 minutes a day.
Hmm.
Where's the logic in that? I haven't seen any. And so if we can simply begin to attune to it and acknowledge that our intellect, our human intellect, is highly inferior to the
Hmm.
intelligence of
Ooh.
our design, our physical design, and um, our connection with the earth, with the cosmos that's been around forever, right? Our human intellect's not that old. It's pretty much brand new. It like we just pulled the wrapping and we got it off the shelf. But our body intelligence and the systems and structures that operate without any kind of conscious control, those have been around for how long? Yeah, as long as the known universe, essentially, right? It's taken that long to develop a human being that can function the way that we can function. So let's take the time, 5 minutes a day, to listen to what our breath has to say about us. And then we'll feel the feelings, we'll feel the agitation, right? We'll feel the discomfort. And that's the entry point into these subtle realms.
I love that you keep bringing us back to body intelligence. And it's funny because I find myself being dedicated to slowly programming followers on social media, and I'll just post stories all the time that speak of the intelligence of the body and
Mm,
just like putting it out there. Your body is doing this in every moment. Your body is doing this for you. Your body is doing this for you. Just like, and yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a lot to admit in a pretzel, a mind pretzel in itself to be like, my intellectual mind is far less intelligent than the intelligence that I don't have control or command of.
yeah.
Like that's a bit of an ego hit right there.
Well, let's I want to put it in perspective for us too. Like, because I can't help. I look to there are certain beings, human beings or historical beings, mythological beings that I look to as examples because again, in this world, I just haven't found as many examples of what I'm looking for. And those examples would be like sages, ascetics, people that literally walked away from civilization to deepen their own um, experience, to deepen their practice, right? We would say deepen their practice. What were they
Mhm.
doing, right? We know to a degree, some of them came out of the caves and they had these sets of movements, or, they had these incredible abilities. Guys can light newspaper on fire with their bare hands. And like the list of those kinds of supernatural abilities goes on and on. But before the supernatural abilities, if we're looking at the action of literally taking a step back from the constant movement, what's happening? There's a deepening. There's there's something that emerges from removing ourselves from that constant stream of noise and constant stream of action. Is it possible to stay involved and also deepen our practice? I don't know. But what I do know is that our physical experience and the way that we relate with other human beings in a very somatic, energetic way, to me, that seems to set more of a stage for the next generation or the next generations than the constant stream of information, right?
Mm,
We uncover something really brilliant. We want to share that. It's like, okay, cool. I've just spent how much of my time have I just spent putting that post out about this thing? And how long is that post going to maintain its relevance relative to how much of my own life force I've put into that? Now,
mm,
if I took that same amount of time and I invested it internally into my
mm,
practice, into the development of my breath, the development of my internal space, and the result or the product, if you will, of that time spent, then can have a more direct influence on the environment that I find myself in. And that includes the trees and the birds and the flowers. It doesn't
mm,
just include the human beings.
mm,
If I can bring some of that into my directly into my life around me, an argument could be made that I'm having a much greater influence from taking that approach than from wanting to just constant. And I'm guilty of this. I want to constantly tell the world about the things that are so important and that we should be focused on, but it pulls from me in ways that sometimes, at least for my makeup, can be really really like de- um depleting is the
mm.
word I'm looking for. So I'm still trying to balance that out a little bit.
I'd love to dive in a little bit to some of these practices, these simple practices, and how long you've been doing them.
Mm,
So let's talk about just one of the most simple standing postures and how long you've been doing that, because I do want to emphasize this potency of going slow in the long run. I
yeah.
think in the world of 2-day shipping and you can buy anything from anywhere in the world at any moment on your phone and see a video from anywhere on the world at any moment and just so much instant hits. And I think it's important to have these conversations, particularly as men. And so let's talk about some of these simple postures and just your journey with them and see
Mm.
how that weaves into this subject of attunement to self and how that relates to pleasure, arousal, all of these things.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll start off by saying that probably spent a good 12 to 15 years studying Qigong. And I won't say I was studying it or I was practicing it wrong, but I was in a dialogue and I was working with what I had found. And I also sometimes felt like I had figured something out and I was teaching it. I was teaching a lot of the things that I was learning, but I was teaching them as a part of my learning process.
Hmm.
And then in the past couple of years, from my continued exploration and my thirst for deeper deeper knowledge, deeper practice, deeper understanding, brought me more information that showed me that actually there were subtle adjustments. There were still fine-tuned adjustments that I needed to make to my practice and my practices that once I opened, when I was open and I realized, holy crap, this is okay, this is what I've been looking for. The Everything went like just that much deeper. It was like it kept going. And I say this sometimes, like this practice keeps going. So we've talked a little bit about, like you mentioned it, right? You've said it a couple of times, standing, right? Standing in place, standing with the hands in a particular position, or working with the breath. We are learning how to get out of the way. That's ultimately what we're really trying to do. And I had a guy the other day say something. We were talking a little bit about this, and he said, "Well, he said it sounds like what you're saying. He sounds like a meditation." And I was like, "Well, it is and it isn't, because when we're seated, meditation is really focused on, like you said earlier, observing the mind for the most part. Seated meditation doesn't involve the body so heavily as standing does. Once we stand, we literally have opened up an entirely new set of conditions and circumstances and patterns to work with. That's very different from sitting and breathing in meditation. So discomfort, misalignments, imbalances, the shapes, right? We talk about the shapes. Once we start to turn our awareness and our attention into the breath, and the breath is showing us what our body is actually doing, the shapes that we are actually making in space, um, how does that correlate with arousal states? So this is me just like looking for like the next thread. So my practice has been really about slowing down, slowing down, slowing down, slowing down. And I'll just relate that with my own experience with intimacy, is that I was so bound up in my one psychological imaginative space when it comes to my early introduction to pornography, um, the fire, if you will, of the root of that fiery energy of male sexual energy, or masculine sexual energy that fires up and create this impulse of like, okay, I gotta do this. It's this irritation of not being able to simply just be still.
Mm,
And up to the present, really my practice has just shown me that like arousal is a as a whole is a an experience that's carried over a much longer period of time, and that's what I'm interested in, like with my wife and being in a long-term
mm, mm.
committed devotional partnership. I'm like, oh man, like we can just stoke these little fires and just like keep these little like this little we just keep this fire going. And so that has been challenging for me because sometimes I'm like, all right, cool, things are moving. And then in a very small amount of time, things will get too hot for me. And so that's what I'm dancing with in my own personal practice with standing, for example, is like just noticing those little tiny details where something gets stuck or something gets too intense or there's irritation of some kind, and bringing it, softening it, getting underneath of it again, and again and again. So I don't know if that really answers the question, but that's
Well,
what I feel it.
I just had something percolate in that felt really exciting, and it was that the more attuned to subtleties I can be, the more information I have access to work with. And
Yeah.
just like you were talking about doing your standing practice for 12 years of slowing down, being with yourself, going through these different layers, and then you have like some realization that many years later as you attune to subtler and subtler things that like adjust your whole journey. And I think this is one of the skills that I find so important for a man in every arena of his life, but particularly when he looks at his relationship to pleasure is he looking for information about himself
Mm,
at all? Is he curious about how he relates to pleasure in any way, whether it's self-pleasure, whether it's pleasure with another person? Like there's infinite layers to these behaviors and what's going on in our bodies. And I'm realizing, oh, the more attuned to subtlety I am, the more information I have to work with.
mm,
And I know this from not just, this side of things, but doing deep emotional introspection, psychological introspection is like there's just those aha moments where something is felt or seen in myself, and this whole realization opens up that sends me on a completely different journey in my life in some way, and it
yeah.
shifts things dramatically just from being there for a moment and looking to subtle levels with that curiosity and this like this whole
Yeah.
explosive epiphany.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing you, what I'm hearing you like speaking to here too is the art of change, right? So like the, the inward to the outward in terms of at least the practices that we're speaking about. Let's just say we're talking about Qigong practice here. Qigong sets us up to reverse engineer our life. And even that, when I say that, I'm like, Jesus, that sounds so like new agey. But like, but I have to put words on it somehow, right? And
Yeah.
this has been this lifelong, literally like half of my life has been spent in this question of like, okay, I know that I am, a divine being. I know that I have the power to shape my reality. Like I've gone through all of that stuff. And yet there's still something that's not necessarily missing, but there's like a key ingredient, or maybe it's not one practice, but it's a pathway that leads to the ability to cultivate and create, again, not for the sole purpose of like exploiting my environment or consolidating power, influence, but actually to help shape the world that I find myself in, right? Leave the world a better place. And
Hmm.
if I can create more space inside of myself for compassion and grace, pleasure, even grief and pain and sadness, right? To experience more in the felt sense, more emotion, more more the range of what is it to be alive, um, then I have the capacity to hold that space for a lot more, whether it's a tree that's just been cut down for development, or it's a small child who's having a hard time. And I'm still a work in progress when it comes to
Mm,
compassion for my own children. But that's it's come a long way through that continued exploration of like, all right, this outside external expression that I don't like, whether it's in myself or it's something that's coming back at me or I'm seeing or perceiving, I'm a I'm connected to it. That's the only reason I'm seeing it, is because
mm,
there is a connection here, which means that that thing that seems to be outside of me is actually inside of me, right? And so this isn't a philosophical, spiritual, heady kind of thing. This is an actual experience of felt inside of my own body that I can attune to and have access to the information about what's going on here.
mm.
Um, that that leads me towards hopefully being a better human being, or being more authentically myself and less the stories that I have about myself. If that makes sense.
I love that you brought in capacity to feel and, in these different arenas that we're talking about because, man, it's easy to be numb these days. To have screens that are just showing us, oh, now these people are being bombed over here. Oh, now these people are being killed here. Oh, this corruption's happening here. It's like the capacity to feel it's like becoming more and more numb. And these
Yeah.
practices, whether it's Qigong or Tai Chi, or maybe even a practice, maybe it's becoming more aware with pleasure, which is often what I talk a lot about. All of these practices are about waking ourselves back up to
Mm,
being human and feeling in connection to the world around us instead of what the world is like actually doing in the outside world which is moving us to being more like robots and
yeah.
everything's just analytical and you just think about this thing and the numbers and and speed and do it quick and it's like it's really interesting because it is that outward expression that we're moving more towards being analytical. And these practices are like, oh, what is the depth to feel in connection to what is around me in this moment?
Yeah. Man, oh man, that's well said. And it could go. I start thinking about ancestors, right? I start thinking about like people that maybe are beings that are not either on the other side or aren't here yet, and like what a responsibility it is to be alive right now and to create the opportunities for feeling. Like if the human body is this, it's really a feeling space, right? And the driving force in our culture seems to be moving us more towards robotic way of being, right? Mechanistic, which it's, we've been on that course for how many hundreds of years, if not 1,000 years. Um, that that our responsibility and our power lies, and definitely lies in feeling. Um, and also ultimately like cultivating our energy however we choose to do it, right? If it's through pleasure practice, if it's through, um, you know, I was listening to one of your earlier episodes and about like, all this group pleasure stuff that's happening, right? And like people exploring, and there's so many different ways that we can get into our bodies and feel more. And then what do we do with it?
Mm,
Where's the where does it circulate back
mm,
into the world? Because yes,
ooh,
of course, I want to feel pleasure.
ooh,
I would love to be able to create pleasure for others.
yeah,
And also, like, there's a real strong need for service for
yes,
those who either aren't at the level of exploring. Maybe pleasure for someone, again, is like what I always go back to this example because it's, where we live, there's just a lot of this, but like, what would it be like for that old woman to not have to open up a heavy door, or to
yeah,
lift her heavy bag of groceries into her car, or to have a strong younger man come up and offer his arm to walk her to her car while it's raining, or just being aware of our environment so that we can be in service to it. It takes the work, the internal work, especially again with pleasure. It's like, whoa, okay,
yeah,
if spirit, if the source of all things, if God, if the universe is wanting me to feel this good? Is it because it's my birthright and I deserve it? Yes, maybe. And maybe that same source of intelligent life force, whatever, wants me to turn around and offer something of service to the people around me. Right. And maybe I'll get more. Maybe there will be more pleasure on the other side of it. Right. But it's like, I have got to put this into use. This has got to become service somehow, because that's what we need in the world right now. Yes, we need more pleasure. Hell yes, we need more pleasure. And we also need beings, bodies that are physically, emotionally, structurally prepared to do the heavy lifting of caring and tending for a world that is in a rough place.
And yeah, this leads to such an important conversation around the world is full of a lot of pleasure, but it's not attuned and in a way that the energy is doing anything. It's just, it's like the guy that's, ejaculating every day, that he's masturbating and ejaculating every day. It's all this pleasure that just doesn't go to any creativity or to any, you know, collective of men growing something in some way. And I think this is a really important part of the conversation, and why I even am so passionate about this conversation is when pleasure is actually shaped in a way where there's fulfillment and satisfaction. Now I have a resource of energy. Just like being taught in Taoism for so long, it's like building the Dantian and building the energy inside, and then going and being a creator, adding to
Yeah.
the world instead of just being a hungry ghost constantly consuming. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that that's the huge thing in this conversation that you just hit head on, is like, how do we actually be present in our bodies to enjoy pleasure, that it sustains and fills us with energy to go do something with it, to
Yeah.
go be a gift to others with how good we're feeling inside of ourselves?
Yeah. Yeah. Well said, man. Well said. And that goes back to, it ties back to the long range plan. I mean, we're here for the long haul. We have to be here for the long haul. We know we're not gonna be here forever. And at the same time, um, in order for us to sustain the movement, to sustain the effort that we're putting into really trying to leave the world a better place, trying to create and cultivate space and possibility for the next generation to come in, find their footing, and then continue on with this work. Yeah, we got to cultivate life force. I mean, flat out, as men, especially as men. Um, and you know, back to the sort of the the examples, right? There are examples and written examples of men who lived well into their 200s, and our modern world doesn't like it, thinks that it's just hogwash, but the reality is that we're living so differently in our modern world than some of these ancient wandering masters, wizards were living, and the information that they had, and the practices that they were cultivating are still available to us. Right? It's still available to us. Taoism is uh, hard on simplicity. Again, what happens to our psychosomatic experience as human beings when we are overloaded with information, when we're
Mm,
overloaded with doing, with taking care of everything and everybody, and in order for it to change, we are going to have to feel, and I'd say this with a lot of, like, I feel strongly about this. We are going to have to feel the slingshot or the boomerang effect of all of that input when we
mm,
start to input less.
mm,
It's going to be uncomfortable because we've been so programmed. We've put so much into that driving forward, constantly progressing in excess, that when we stop doing that, we're going to feel blowback emotionally. And we don't know who we're going to become, and ultimately, I think that's the exciting part of all of this work is that we change, and the stories that we hold in our bodies change. The stories that we tell the world around us can change, right? Who I was, the conditions I had when I was growing up, yeah, that stuff is still there. Like it's not like that just disappeared and then I no longer have traumas. But because the traumas aren't living in my body, I have the capacity to become authentically me. You have the opportunity to become authentically you by putting things down as opposed to keep picking things up and sticking them like velcro to our, you know, our velcro human shirt. Just like, hey, look at this patch I got over here and this patch and this patch. And it's like, I don't even have anywhere to put this next one. What do I do with this patch? You know, it's like, well, maybe start taking patches off, right? So, and it can be that easy, but it's also, it takes a lot of commitment, devotion, dedication, and a realistic dialogue about what is required, right? It's not a 6 week class. It's not a
Mm,
6 month course.
mm,
It's how many years, how much of your life are you willing to dedicate to this process? Because the payoff is unquantifiable, at least from
mm,
what we've been told.
mm. Tell the listeners a little bit about the bear cave as we go towards
Oh yeah,
closing this thing.
formerly known as the Bear Cave.
That's right, it changed.
Yeah, so um, the the Temple of the Red Cedar Fist is an online circle platform for men where we are concentrating on building a solid foundation within our internal space, um, chi cultivation, learning how to be in the internal space of the body, learning how to uh, mobilize the joints, open up to more fluid movement, learning how to align, move energy into the right places so that we can be balanced psychological, mentally, emotionally, physically, develop ourselves spiritually in the arts of Kung Fu, and really just being in connection with the developmental process and doing it together. So live weekly classes, lots of instructional content, continuously building out more courses to offer, and and just having this beautiful space for men to train together, even when we can't train. Like you and I get to train in a physical
Yeah,
on a regular basis. So yeah,
yeah.
supporting a real pathway that again supports us reattuning or reorienting to what it does it actually take to go the distance.
And I'll put the link in there as well for people listening. And I'm in
Thanks,
there,
brother.
so you'd be in there with me. And I really think that it's once again banging on the drum of cultivating these practices that give me space to slow down, be attuned to self, and practice going into the subtleties of where I can collect more information. What's going on with my pelvis in this way? What is, oh, this
Mm,
energy is opening up here. I'm feeling stagnant here. Just in noticing these things, it can take me on a whole journey. I could go off on stories of
yeah.
my own experience of feeling something somewhere subtle and just being curious about feeling that thing and where it took me. So
Mm,
it's another opportunity to practice this looking inward.
yeah. Well, and I would say just in final, like my final closing comment would be, we as a group, as a collective, the men in the temple of the Red Cedar Fist, no matter where we are on our journey, um, you know, we are here to present, not necessarily an alternative, but we are here to present the a very real and tangible pathway from, say, some of the deep work where we're doing a lot of the emotional excavation. We're showing up for the men's circle. Maybe it's we're going to therapy with our spouse, or we're working on ourselves, and there is complementary work to be done so that we don't have to spend so much time in the intellectual emotional space. We can be in the emotional somatic space, right? Be in the body as the gateway to the emotions, as opposed to being in the mind as the gateway to emotions. It's a very different experience. And when we get to a certain place in our development, emotional development, let's say, and this is just for the men, right? For the men who are on the path, like again, maybe you've been going to the events, been showing up for circle, keep doing that, yes. And just know that there will come a time where we might feel stuck in that way, right? Where we need something that takes us deeper into that internal space once we've done the excavation. Okay, cool. Stuff's not in the way anymore. What do I do now? Now we keep training in a very specific way so that we can continue to develop and build out our capacity for unknown, untold, mysterious, you know, acts of service that will be called upon from us as we move forward into the unknown, into the unknown.
Yeah, you have little girls for sure.
Yeah, that's right, man. Let's go.
Well, that just hit for me. Imagine if men felt so good and so fulfilled and so full of pleasure and joy that they just had to go give in the world. That it was like you just overflowing with so much goodness that it's just like, what am I going to do with this?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go give it somewhere. I'm gonna go open that old lady's door. I'm gonna go build something. I'm gonna be a creator in some way. Thank you, brother, so much for coming on here. Thank you for being in my life. Thank you for the wisdom that you carry, and look forward to the next meeting with you.
Thank you, brother. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. Many more episodes to come. Take care of yourself. And as always, I'm here if any questions come up for you. See you on the next one.